My name is Marcus Chen, and for 11 years, I delivered packages across Alaska's most remote territories. Started as a warehouse sorter in Anchorage, worked my way up to handling the routes nobody else wanted, mining camps accessible only 3 months a year, research stations where scientists went months without seeing another human face, homesteads where families lived entirely off-grid by choice or necessity. I'd seen truck drivers crack under the isolation, watched seasoned delivery men refuse assignments after encountering things they couldn't explain. But I loved the solitude, the challenge, the way Alaska tested every skill I'd learned. I thought I understood this land's dangers, the weather, the wildlife, the mechanical failures that could strand you 100 miles from help. What I discovered on Route 47 last November was something else entirely. Something that's been waiting in Alaska's wilderness far longer than any of us realized. It was Tuesday, November 15th, when my supervisor handed me the emergency route assignment. The regular driver, Tom McKenzie, 23 years on the job, tough as anyone I'd known, had called in that morning refusing to complete his deliveries. Just said he couldn't go back out there and hung up. Management was scrambling to find coverage for 300 miles of wilderness drops scattered across the backwoods northeast of Fairbanks. McKenzie won't say what happened, my supervisor admitted, looking genuinely worried. Something about a woman who wouldn't stop talking to him, claims he delivered the same package 12 times in one day. Corporate thinks he's having a breakdown. I should have paid more attention to that warning, should have asked more questions. But emergency routes paid double overtime, and I had student loans breathing down my neck. The first 29 miles went exactly as expected. My truck handled the gradually worsening road conditions without complaint. The logging road was rutted but passable, my GPS was tracking properly, and my radio maintained clear contact with dispatch. Everything was routine, professional, exactly what 11 years of experience had taught me to expect. Mile 30 changed everything. The forest just stopped. Not gradually, like you'd expect from natural clearing or logging operations. One moment I was driving through dense spruce and birch, the next I was in a circular clearing maybe 200 yards across. Perfectly circular, no stumps, no evidence of cutting, like the trees had simply never grown there. In the center sat a cabin that didn't match any architectural style I knew. The logs were too uniform, too perfectly fitted. The roofline was wrong somehow, too steep, too angular, like it was designed for weather patterns that didn't exist in Alaska. Smoke rose from the chimney in a perfectly straight line despite the wind I could feel buffeting my truck. A woman was waiting on the porch. She appeared to be in her 70s, wearing a wool coat and knit hat that looked handmade but unnaturally pristine. No wear, no fading, like they'd been finished yesterday. She was smiling and waving, but something about her posture seemed prepared, like she'd been standing in that exact position for a long time. "You must be from FedEx," she called out as I approached with her package. "I'm Helen Morrison. I've been waiting for this delivery." Her voice carried too clearly across the distance. Sound doesn't travel that cleanly in cold air, especially with wind. I should have noticed that immediately. She signed for her package on my handheld scanner with practiced efficiency, her signature flowing smooth and confident. Then she handed me a tin of cookies that had been sitting ready on the porch railing. "You be careful driving out there, young man. There's dangerous ice patches exactly 2 miles up this road. Many accidents over the years, many people who never made it home." The way she said "never made it home" sent a chill through me that had nothing to do with Alaska's November cold. According to my GPS, the next delivery was 2.1 miles further down the same road. Simple straight shot, maybe 5 minutes of driving. I thanked Helen, secured the cookie tin in my cab, and continued my route. 47 minutes later, I was still driving the same straight road with no sign of my destination. This wasn't possible. I'd been maintaining steady speed on a road with no turnoffs, no intersections, no geographical features that could cause navigation confusion. My odometer showed I'd traveled over 30 miles, but my GPS insisted I was still approaching my next delivery point just ahead. I stopped the truck and checked all my instruments. GPS showed proper satellite connection and accurate positioning. Radio was receiving clear signals from 3 different repeater towers. Compass needle pointed steadily north. Everything was functioning normally, except reality itself seemed to be malfunctioning. When I turned around to backtrack and ask Helen for directions, I found her cabin again exactly 17 minutes later. She was standing on her porch in the identical position, same coat, same hat, same expectant smile. "You must be from FedEx. I'm Helen Morrison. I've been waiting for this delivery." Identical words, identical inflection, identical timing, like listening to a recording played back perfectly. "Helen, we just met. I delivered your package 40 minutes ago." She looked at me with genuine confusion. "I'm sorry, but this is the first time I've seen you today. Are you feeling all right?" I checked my scanner's delivery log. According to the electronic record, I had completed Helen Morrison's delivery at 2:17 p.m. and collected her signature. The timestamp was there, the GPS coordinates logged, her signature captured, but the scanner's clock now read 2:19 p.m. 2 minutes had passed, but I'd been driving for nearly an hour. I tried calling dispatch. My radio crackled with static, then cleared to reveal voices I didn't recognize, discussing deliveries to addresses that didn't exist. When I tried to transmit, the voices continued as if I hadn't spoken. Helen completed the identical interaction, same signature, same cookies, same warning about ice patches 2 miles ahead. But this time I studied her more carefully. Her breath wasn't fogging in the cold air. The temperature was well below freezing, and I could see my own breath clearly, but Helen's exhalations produced no visible vapor. Her eyes, when she looked directly at me, seemed to be focusing on something slightly behind my head rather than making actual eye contact. The cookies in the tin were covered with a thin layer of white mold. I drove the route again, timing every detail. 17 minutes of straight driving at consistent speed brought me back to Helen's clearing. The distance my odometer measured varied, sometimes 12 miles, sometimes 36, sometimes 8, but the time remained constant, 17 minutes, always 17 minutes. On the 4th loop, I started asking Helen different questions. "What year is it, Helen?" "Why, it's 1987. "Of course." "What month?" "December. Almost Christmas. That's why this delivery is so important." "Helen, it's November. November 15th. She smiled politely, but her expression didn't change. "December, dear. December 23rd. The snow's been falling for weeks." I looked around the clearing. There was snow on the ground, but only a light dusting. Definitely not weeks' worth of accumulation. "What day of the week is it?" "Monday. Always loved Mondays. Fresh start to the week." She was wrong about everything, year, month, day, but she answered with complete confidence each time. And she gave the exact same responses on every subsequent loop. By the 8th loop, I was testing her systematically. I asked about the weather, her family, current events, her life history. Her answers never varied by a single word. She was like a sophisticated recording, programmed with a limited set of responses that she delivered with perfect consistency. But recordings don't sign delivery scanners. Recordings don't hand you physical objects. I examined the cookies more carefully. They looked normal from a distance, but closer inspection revealed they were covered in what looked like white fungus. They smelled strongly of decay, like meat that had been left out for weeks. When I broke one open, the interior was black and writhing with tiny white maggots. Helen's signature on my scanner was not just similar each time, it was identical down to the pixel. Same pressure points, same timing, like someone tracing over the exact same pattern repeatedly. On the 10th loop, I tried photographing Helen with my phone. She posed cooperatively, smiling for the camera, but when I reviewed the images, they showed only an empty porch, with wind chimes hanging motionless in the still air. I used my phone's internet connection to research Helen Morrison. Found her obituary in the Fairbanks Daily News Minor Archives, dated December 24th, 1987. Helen Morrison, age 74, found frozen to death in her remote cabin after failing to receive a critical medical delivery. The article mentioned she'd been waiting for heart medication that never arrived due to a routing error. She died on December 23rd, exactly 37 years ago. But I'd been delivering packages to her all afternoon. On the 15th loop, I tried breaking the cycle by driving past her cabin without stopping. But regardless of which direction I drove, the road curved in ways that weren't physically possible, always bringing me back to her clearing exactly 17 minutes later. Helen became agitated when I didn't deliver her package. "Where's my medicine?" she asked, following my truck as I attempted to leave. "I need my heart pills. The doctor said they were critical." She moved alongside my vehicle at 30 miles per hour, keeping perfect pace without any sign of exertion. Her gait was wrong, too smooth, too flowing, like she was gliding rather than running. "Please," she said, her breath still not fogging in the frigid air. "I've been waiting so long, my heart hurts. I need my medicine or I'm going to die." When I looked in my side mirror, her reflection was distorted, stretched and wavering like heat shimmer in summer. But the temperature was 15 below zero. I delivered the package to make her stop following me, but the loop continued regardless. By the 20th loop, I was fighting panic. I'd been trapped for what felt like hours, driving the same impossible stretch of road, delivering the same package to the same dead woman who didn't remember our previous interactions. My fuel gauge remained stuck at 3/4 full, despite continuous driving. My radio picked up conversations between drivers I knew were off-duty or working different territories entirely. I decided to open Helen's package. Inside was a prescription bottle labeled Helen Morrison Digitalis. Take as needed for heart condition. The pills inside were white, round, and covered in the same fuzzy mold as the cookies. The prescription date was December 22nd, 1987, yesterday, in Helen's timeline. She'd been waiting 37 years for medication that could have saved her life. That's when I understood the true horror of my situation. Helen wasn't just a ghost repeating her final day. She was trapped in a loop of desperate need, convinced that each delivery might be the medicine that would save her. And I was trapped with her, forced to disappoint her over and over again for eternity. On the 23rd loop, something changed. Helen was no longer alone on the porch. Behind her stood a man in a FedEx uniform I didn't recognize, older style, from the 1980 seconds. He was pale, his skin had a blue-gray tint, and his eyes were completely black. When he saw me, he shook his head slowly. "You shouldn't have come here," he said, his voice carrying impossibly well across the clearing. I tried to warn the company, tried to tell them this address was wrong, but they kept sending drivers. This was Tom Mackenzie. Not the Tom I knew. This was Tom from 1987, the driver who'd failed to deliver Helen's medicine on time. "She won't let us leave," he continued. "Not until someone delivers what she needs. But the medicine is always wrong, always spoiled. She dies anyway. Every time. And we start over." Helen turned to look at Tom, and for the first time, her expression changed. Instead of polite confusion, her face showed recognition, then growing anger. "You promised," she said to him. "You promised you'd bring my medicine, but you never came back." "I tried," Tom said. "But the road doesn't lead anywhere else anymore. Just back to you, always back to you." Helen's attention turned to me. "What about you? Do you have my medicine?" I held up the prescription bottle. "Helen, this medicine is 37 years old. It's covered in mold. It can't help you anymore." Her face began to change. The skin became paler, more translucent. Her eyes darkened to black, matching Tom's. When she spoke, her voice carried the sound of wind through frozen trees. "Then I'll keep waiting, and you'll keep bringing it to me. Forever." The clearing began to shift around us. More figures emerged from the forest. Other delivery drivers from different decades, all wearing uniforms from their respective eras. UPS drivers, postal workers, even a man in clothes from the early 1900s who might have delivered mail by dog sled. All of them had the same pale, blue-gray skin and black eyes. "Welcome to the route," one of them said. "Helen's been waiting a long time. We've all been trying to help her." That's when I realized the true scope of the horror. This wasn't just about one woman's tragic death. Helen's need had created a trap that had been catching delivery personnel for over a century. Every driver who'd tried to reach her remote cabin had become part of her endless wait, forced to attempt the same impossible delivery again and again. But I wasn't ready to accept that fate. I studied Helen carefully, watching how she moved, how she spoke, looking for any pattern I could exploit. That's when I noticed something crucial. She only became agitated when I tried to leave without delivering the package. She was bound by her need, but she was also bound by the social contract of delivery service. "Helen," I said, "what if I told you that your medicine was delivered correctly, but to the wrong address?" Her expression shifted to confusion. "Wrong address? According to my records, your prescription was delivered to Helen Morrison at 247 Birch Creek Trail. But you're Helen Morrison at 274 Birch Creek Trail. Simple clerical error." This was a lie, but Helen's programmed responses didn't include protocols for addressing delivery errors. "If the medicine went to the wrong address," I continued, "then your delivery was never actually attempted. Which means the service failure isn't your fault or mine. It's a system error." Helen considered this, her ghostly mind trying to process a scenario she'd never encountered in 37 years of loops. "System error," she repeated slowly. "That's right, which means I need to file a formal complaint with my dispatcher to correct the addressing database. But I can't do that from here. I need to return to the main office." For the first time since I'd arrived, Helen looked uncertain rather than desperate. "So, you'll make sure the right Helen Morrison gets her medicine? I'll make sure the delivery system is corrected so this never happens to anyone else." Helen nodded slowly. "That would be good, yes, fix the system." She turned to the other trap drivers. "Did you hear that? He's going to fix the system so deliveries reach the right people." Something changed in their black eyes, not hope exactly, but a kind of recognition. They began to nod, one by one. "Fix the system," Tom Mackenzie repeated. "Yes, that's what we should have done." The clearing began to fade around the edges, like someone was erasing it with a huge, invisible brush. The cabin became transparent, then disappeared entirely. Helen and the other drivers became less solid, more like moving shadows. "Thank you," Helen said, her voice now coming from very far away. "Thank you for fixing the system." And then I was alone, standing next to my truck on an empty stretch of logging road. No clearing, no cabin, no ghostly drivers, just forest and snow and the sound of wind through trees. But something was wrong with me. I felt dizzy, nauseous, like I'd been holding my breath for hours. My vision was blurring, and I could hear a steady beeping sound I couldn't identify. I stumbled back to my truck and realized the carbon monoxide detector on my dashboard was going off. Had been going off, I realized, for an unknown amount of time. The truck's heating system had a leak, filling the cab with invisible, odorless poison. I managed to shut off the heater and crack the windows before collapsing into my seat. The fresh air helped clear my head, but I was still severely disoriented. I called for emergency assistance on my radio. "This is Unit 47, requesting immediate medical assistance. Carbon monoxide exposure, unknown duration, GPS coordinates following." The dispatcher's voice came back clear and professional. "Unit 47, we show you've been stationary for approximately 4 hours. Emergency services en route." 4 hours. I'd been unconscious in my truck for 4 hours, hallucinating an elaborate supernatural encounter while slowly being poisoned by my own heating system. But that explanation fell apart when I checked my delivery scanner. Helen Morrison's delivery was logged as completed. Her signature was in the system, along with GPS coordinates for an address that, according to the postal database, had never existed. The timestamp showed I'd made the delivery at 2:17 p.m., exactly when I remembered doing it the first time. When the paramedics arrived, they found me semi-conscious but stable. The carbon monoxide levels in my blood were dangerously high, but not quite fatal. They transported me to Fairbanks Memorial Hospital for observation and treatment. During my recovery, I researched everything I could find about delivery routes in that area. Found records going back to the early 1900s of drivers, postal workers, and freight haulers who'd disappeared or been found dead in their vehicles along various back roads northeast of Fairbanks. Always during winter months. Always while attempting deliveries to remote addresses. The official explanations were always the same: mechanical failure, weather exposure, carbon monoxide poisoning, hypothermia. But the pattern was too consistent to be coincidental. I also found Tom Mackenzie's personnel file from 1987. He'd been a veteran driver with an excellent safety record until December 23rd, when he'd suffered what was described as a psychological episode while attempting a delivery to a remote cabin. He'd called in, claiming he was trapped in a time loop, delivering the same package repeatedly to a woman who died before he arrived. Company records showed he'd been found unconscious in his truck with severe carbon monoxide poisoning, exactly like me. He'd resigned immediately after his recovery and moved to the lower 48 states. The really disturbing part was the delivery records. Tom's scanner had logged a completed delivery to Helen Morrison with her signature and GPS coordinates, just like mine had. But Helen Morrison's death certificate was dated December 23, 1987, the same day Tom claimed to have delivered her package, which meant either the records were wrong or Tom had somehow delivered a package to a woman on the day she died. I tried to contact Tom McKenzie to compare our experiences, but I learned he'd died in 2003 a car accident in Montana. According to the police report, he'd swerved off the road for no apparent reason, as if trying to avoid something that wasn't there. I quit FedEx 3 days after being released from the hospital, moved back to Seattle, took a job with a local courier service that only handled urban deliveries. I haven't driven a rural route since, and I never plan to again. But the experience changed something fundamental about how I understand reality. I started noticing things I'd never paid attention to before. The way some addresses seem to exist only when you're looking for them. How certain roads feel wrong, like they're leading somewhere they shouldn't. The way delivery drivers sometimes develop nervous habits, checking their carbon monoxide detectors obsessively, refusing to take routes in specific areas, carrying extra communication equipment. 6 months after my experience, I received a call from a FedEx supervisor I didn't recognize. He said they were updating their route safety protocols and wanted to interview drivers who'd experienced unusual incidents in remote areas. "We're particularly interested in Route 47, he said. "We've had several drivers report irregularities in that area over the years." "What kind of irregularities?" "Time discrepancies, GPS anomalies, deliveries that can't be verified. We're trying to determine if there's a pattern." I told him about Helen Morrison, about the loops, about finding other drivers trapped with her. He listened without interrupting, taking notes. "Mr. Chen," he said when I finished, "you're the 7th driver to report nearly identical experiences on that route. The stories are so similar, we initially thought you were all copying each other somehow. But the dates span 60 years, and most of the drivers never met. What are you going to do about it?" "We've permanently removed Route 47 from active service. The official reason is road maintenance issues, but the real reason is that we can't guarantee driver safety in that area." "And the other drivers who reported similar experiences?" "Most quit shortly after their incidents. A few requested transfers to urban routes. One," he paused. "One never made it out. We found his truck 3 days later, engine still running, heater on full blast, carbon monoxide poisoning, but his delivery scanner showed he'd completed 12 deliveries to the same address in a 4-hour period. That driver was found dead in his truck, exactly where I'd been rescued. I think about Helen Morrison often, about her desperate need for medicine that could save her life, and how that need became strong, enough to trap people across multiple decades. I wonder if she's still waiting somewhere, in some version of that clearing, for a delivery that can never truly satisfy her requirements. But mostly, I think about the other drivers, men and women who went to work one day expecting routine deliveries and instead found themselves caught in someone else's final moments, replaying tragedy until it killed them too. The human need for connection, for completion, for resolution, end quote. Sometimes it becomes so powerful it transcends death itself. And sometimes, if you're unlucky enough to be in the wrong place at the wrong time, it reaches out and pulls you into its endless repetition. I keep Helen's prescription bottle on my desk as a reminder. The pills inside have turned to powder now, but the label is still legible. Take as needed for heart condition. Some needs, I've learned, can never be satisfied, and some deliveries should never be attempted. But every winter, when the snow starts falling and the days get short, I find myself checking the carbon monoxide detector in my car obsessively. Because I know there are other routes out there, other trapped souls waiting for deliveries that will never come. And I know that Alaska's wilderness holds things far more dangerous than bears or blizzards or mechanical failure. It holds the weight of human desperation, crystallized into something that can reach across decades to claim new victims. Route 47 is officially closed now, but I've heard rumors that other drivers, working for other companies, have reported similar experiences on different roads. Time loops, impossible deliveries, signatures from people who died years ago. The wilderness is patient. It has all the time in the world to wait for the next driver who thinks they can handle anything Alaska can throw at them. I used to be one of those drivers. Now I know better. Some packages should never be delivered. Some routes should never be driven. And some needs are so powerful they can trap you forever in the moment of trying to fulfill them. That's the truth about Route 47. That's what really happens when you try to make deliveries to places that don't want to let you leave. My name is David Chen, and I've been a rural mail carrier for the United States Postal Service for 11 years. That might not sound like much, but out here in central Alaska, 11 years means I've survived things that would break most people. I've delivered mail in 60 below temperatures where your breath freezes before it leaves your lungs. I've pushed through whiteout blizzards where you can't see your own hood ornament. I've had my Jeep break down 40 miles from nowhere, with wolves circling in the darkness, waiting. But I keep going. Because out here on Route 47, a 200-mile stretch of frozen hell that includes scattered cabins, dying communities, and homesteads that most maps forgot to include, I'm not just delivering mail. I'm delivering hope. Pension checks that mean the difference between heat and hypothermia. Medication that keeps old-timers breathing for another month. Letters from children down south who've forgotten their parents exist. The people out here don't just depend on me. They worship me. I'm their lifeline to a world that's moved on without them. When I don't show up, they start measuring how many days of food they have left. When my headlights cut through their cabin windows, they cry with relief. That responsibility used to keep me awake at night. Now I know there are worse things than insomnia. What I'm about to tell you happened during the winter of 2008, and it's the reason I haven't slept through a full night since. It's why I keep 3 loaded shotguns in my house, and why I installed motion detectors around my property. It's why I transferred off Route 47, and why the Postal Service had to shut down that entire section of rural delivery. Because some mail isn't meant for the living, and some routes don't end when your shift is over. The storm hit on February 15th, 2008, and the Weather Service got it wrong. Dead wrong. They predicted 6 to 8 inches. We got 3 feet in 12 hours, with winds that turned the snow into frozen bullets. The temperature dropped to 47 below, and the wind chill made it feel like the surface of Mars. I should have turned back. My supervisor Janet radioed me at 2 p.m., her voice crackling through the static. "David, abort the route. Come back while you still can." But I had Mrs. Morrison's heart medication on board, and she was down to her last 2 pills. I had Pete Kowalski's disability check, and his propane tank was running empty. And I had a delivery for the Crawford family out on Forest Service Road 419, a place so remote that GPS couldn't find it and cell towers had never heard of it. The Morrison delivery took 40 minutes because I had to dig her entire driveway out by hand. Mrs. Morrison stood in her doorway the whole time, tears streaming down her face, apologizing over and over for making me risk my life for her pills. That's when you know you're not just doing a job anymore. You're keeping someone alive. Pete's cabin was worse. His driveway was completely blocked, so I strapped on snowshoes and hiked 3/4 of a mile through snow that came up to my chest. By the time I reached his door, my lungs felt like I was breathing glass shards. Pete opened up before I could knock. He'd been watching for me through his window for 6 hours. "David," he wheezed. "I knew you'd come. I told God if you didn't make it, I was ready to go. That's the weight I carry. That's why I couldn't turn back, even when the storm got so bad that my headlights only cut through maybe 10 feet of swirling white death." It was past 7 p.m. when I reached the turnoff for Forest Service Road 419, full dark, with snow coming down like the world was ending. The road wasn't plowed, probably hadn't been plowed all winter. My Jeep's engine was starting to labor, and I could feel the transmission struggling. But my delivery scanner showed one more stop, 1247 Forest Service Road 419. Crawford family. I'd been delivering to the Crawfords since June. Nice family. Tom worked some kind of computer job from home, Linda was a teacher doing online classes, and they had 3 kids. They always got a decent amount of mail, catalogs, bills, packages from Amazon. Normal family trying to live off the grid but still connected to civilization. The drive to their cabin should have taken 15 minutes. It took me almost an hour, crawling through snowdrifts and around fallen trees. Twice, I got stuck and had to dig myself out with the emergency shovel I keep in the back. My hands were so cold that I couldn't feel my fingers anymore, even inside my thick gloves. When I finally reached their cabin, I almost cried with relief. Warm yellow light glowed from every window, and smoke was rising from the chimney in a steady, comforting stream. After the nightmare drive through the storm, it looked like salvation. I parked as close as I could to their mailbox and grabbed their mail, a thick stack of catalogs and what looked like an important letter from Seattle. As I trudged through the knee-deep snow to their mailbox, I could see the family through the frost-covered windows. They were sitting around their dinner table, Tom at the head, Linda to his right, and the 3 kids lined up on the other side. They were passing dishes around, talking and laughing. Steam was rising from their plates. Perfect family scene, exactly what you'd want to see after driving through hell. I stuffed their mail into the box and waved toward the window. Tom looked up and waved back, then said something to the family. They all turned and waved at me. Linda smiled and mouthed, "Thank you," through the glass. I climbed back into my Jeep, feeling good about myself. Another successful delivery, another family that wouldn't have to worry about their mail. The drive back to town was still treacherous, but I made it to the post office by 9:30 p.m. Janet was waiting with coffee and a space heater. "David, you crazy bastard," she said. "I thought we'd lost you out there." I logged my final delivery. 1,247, Forest Service Road, 419, delivered at 1947. Crawford family. Then I went home to my apartment, took a hot shower, and fell asleep feeling like I'd done something good. The next morning, everything went wrong. I was updating my delivery logs when the phone rang. Janet answered, and I could hear her voice getting more and more confused. "Yes, this is the Fairview post office." "What do you mean abandoned?" "No, that's impossible. We deliver there 3 times a week." She hung up and called me into her office. Her face was pale. "David, that was the State Patrol. They got a report about vehicle tracks leading to an abandoned cabin on Forest Service Road 419. They think someone might be squatting there illegally." "That's not abandoned," I said. "I was just there last night. The Crawford family lives there." Janet pulled up something on her computer. "According to this, that cabin has been empty since 2008. The last residents died in a carbon monoxide accident." I stared at her. "Janet, I've been delivering to the Crawfords for 8 months. I saw them eating dinner last night." They waved at me. "David, you were out there for 12 hours in sub-zero temperatures. Hypothermia can cause hallucinations. Your mind was playing tricks on you." But I knew what I'd seen. After my shift, I drove back out to Forest Service Road 419. The road was still barely passable from the storm, but I had to see for myself. What I found made my blood turn to ice water. The cabin was dark, not just empty, it felt dead. The windows weren't glowing with warm light, they were boarded up with plywood that was gray and weathered. No smoke was rising from the chimney. Instead, I could see that the chimney pipe was broken, hanging at an angle that would let snow and wind pour directly into the house. Snow was piled against the front door, in drifts that clearly hadn't been disturbed in years. No footprints, no tire tracks except my own from the night before. The mailbox was rusted shut and tilted at a crazy angle. I sat in my Jeep, engine running, staring at this dead place, but my delivery scanner still showed a successful delivery to that address. Yesterday, 7:47 p.m. Crawford family. The scanner doesn't lie. It's GPS linked and tamper-proof. Every delivery gets logged automatically. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about that warm, cozy family scene I'd witnessed. The way Tom had waved at me, how Linda had mouthed, "Thank you," through the window, the kids passing dishes around the table. It had been real. I knew it was real. The next day, I dug deeper into the postal records. The Crawford address had been active on my route since June 2007. According to my scanner's memory, I'd made deliveries there 127 times. But when I accessed the main postal service database, I found something that made my hands shake. The last official mail delivery to 1247 Forest Service Road 419 was logged on March 15, 2008. The delivery note read, "Family deceased. Carbon monoxide poisoning. Route discontinued." I called the regional office in Anchorage. The clerk who answered sounded bored until I mentioned the Crawford address. "Oh God," she said, "you're asking about the Crawford family? That was before my time, but everyone here knows that story. Horrible tragedy." "What happened?" "Carbon monoxide leak from their heating system. The whole family died in their sleep. Tom and Linda Crawford and their 3 kids, Jake, Emma, and little Tommy. They found them about a week after they died because their mail carrier noticed the mailbox was overflowing." My vision went blurry. Those were the names. Those were the exact names of the family I'd been delivering to for 8 months. The worst part, the clerk continued, was that they almost moved away. Tom had gotten a job offer from a tech company in Seattle. Really good position. But the letter got delayed because of a blizzard, and by the time it was delivered, they were already dead. If they'd gotten that job offer on time, they would have moved away and never died. I hung up and sat staring at my computer screen. According to my records, I'd delivered mail to the Crawford family yesterday, but according to the Postal Service, they'd been dead for 15 years. The smart thing would have been to report the glitch to IT and ask to have the address removed from my route. But the next morning, there it was again on my delivery list. 1247 Forest Service Road. 419, Crawford family. 4 pieces of mail waiting to go out. I tried skipping the address, drove right past the turnoff and finished the rest of my route. But when I got back to the office, Janet was waiting with a confused expression and a note in her hand. "David, we got a complaint call about 30 minutes ago. Tom Crawford called, asking why his mail didn't come today. He sounded really upset. Said his family was expecting some important letters." The room started spinning. "Tom Crawford called?" "Yeah," he said, "they've been loyal customers for years, and they depend on regular mail delivery. You need to go back out there before the end of your shift." I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her that Tom Crawford had been dead since 2008, that I'd seen his death certificate, that the cabin was abandoned and falling apart. But how do you explain that your supervisor just took a phone call from a ghost? Instead, I loaded the Crawford mail back into my Jeep and drove out to Forest Service Road 419 for the second time that day. As I approached the cabin, I could feel something wrong in the air. The temperature seemed to drop, even though my heater was running full blast. The radio started picking up static, not weather interference, but voices, whispered conversations in languages I didn't recognize. Children crying somewhere far away. But when I reached the cabin, it looked lived in again. Smoke was curling from the chimney, warm light glowed from the windows. Children's sleds leaned against the porch railing, and I could see someone moving around inside. I delivered the mail with shaking hands and was walking back to my Jeep when the front door opened. "David!" Tom Crawford waved from the doorway. He looked exactly like I remembered, tall, brown hair, glasses, wearing a thick sweater, but something was wrong with his face. His smile was too wide, and his eyes reflected the light like an animal's. "Thanks for coming back." Linda was worried when the mail didn't come this morning. Every instinct I had screamed at me to run, but Tom was standing right there, solid and real as anyone. "You okay?" he asked, and his voice sounded like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine. I managed. Just a long day." "Well, come on in and warm up. Linda's got coffee on, and the kids would love to see their mail carrier again." The word "again" hit me like a physical blow. But before I could process it, Tom was holding the door open, and I could smell coffee and something baking inside. The professional part of me, the part that had been building relationships with customers for 11 years, made the decision. I followed Tom Crawford into his cabin. Inside, it was exactly like I'd seen through the windows, but wrong in ways that made my skin crawl. The family was there. Linda in the kitchen, the 3 kids at the table doing homework, but their movements were too fluid, like they were underwater. When they spoke, their voices had an echo that didn't match the size of the room. "Everyone, this is David, our mail carrier. Tom announced. The family turned to look at me in perfect unison, and I realized their eyes were completely black. Not just the pupils, the entire eye, like they'd been filled with oil. "Hello, David," they said together, in voices that sounded like wind through dead trees. Linda poured me coffee in a mug that read, "World's Best Dad," but the coffee was ice cold and tasted like cemetery dirt. The family photos on the mantelpiece showed the same people, but in every picture, their faces were slightly wrong. Too many teeth, eyes that didn't quite line up, shadows that fell in impossible directions. "So," Linda said, "how long have you been delivering mail to our family?" 8 months, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Tom and Linda exchanged a look that lasted too long. "But David," Tom said, "you've been our mail carrier for years. Since we moved out here in February 2008. 2008. The year they died. What year do you think it is?" I asked. The family looked at each other with expressions of concern that were perfectly synchronized. "It's 2008, Jake," the oldest boy said. His voice cracked like a teenager's, but his teeth were filed to points. "February 20th, 2008. Are you feeling okay, Mr. David?" I looked around the cabin again. Everything was from 2008. The computer monitor was one of those old, thick CRT models. The TV was a tube television with rabbit ears. The calendar on the wall showed February 2008, and all the days after the 20th were crossed out in red ink. "I need to ask you something," I said. "Are you waiting for any important mail?" Tom's face lit up with an expression of desperate hope. "Yes. I'm expecting a job offer from Seattle Technologies. They said they'd send the contract this week. It's a really good position. Senior programmer, great salary, benefits. We could move to the city, get the kids into better schools. When were you supposed to receive it?" "Today," Linda said. "February 20th. But you didn't bring it." "David, we need that letter. We've been waiting so long." I realized what was happening. The Crawford family was trapped in their final day of life, reliving February 20th, 2008, over and over. They were waiting for a job offer that would save their lives, a letter that would take them away from the cabin before the heating system leaked carbon monoxide into their bedroom that night. "I have to go," I said, standing up quickly. The family's expressions changed instantly, their faces twisting into masks of rage and desperation. "You can't leave," Tom hissed, and his voice was no longer human. "You have to bring us our mail. You have to bring us that letter." "We've been waiting so long," Linda moaned, and when she opened her mouth, black smoke poured out. The children started crying, but their tears were drops of ice that shattered when they hit the floor. "Please, Mr. David," little Tommy sobbed. "We just want to leave this place. We just want to go home." I backed toward the door, but Tom was already moving to block my path. His movements were wrong now, too fast, too fluid, like his joints bent in directions they shouldn't. "You're our mail carrier," he said, and his eyes had become holes in his face. "You have a responsibility to us. You can't abandon your route." I ran for the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The windows went black. The temperature in the cabin dropped so fast that my breath started coming out in visible puffs. "Stay with us, David," the family chanted in unison. "Stay and be our mail carrier forever. Stay and help us wait for our letter." I pulled out my phone to call for help, but the screen showed impossible dates, February 20th, 2008, repeating over and over. The time was stuck at 11:47 p.m., the exact moment the Crawford family had died. That's when I remembered the emergency flare gun I kept in my mailbag for bear attacks. I pulled it out and fired it directly at the largest window. The flare exploded through the glass in a shower of red sparks, and suddenly I could see outside again. I dove through the broken window, cutting myself on the glass, and ran through the snow toward my Jeep. Behind me, I could hear the family screaming. Not human screams, but the sound wind makes when it's trying to tear your house apart. I reached my Jeep and gunned the engine, spinning the tires in the snow. In my rearview mirror, I could see the Crawford family standing in their broken window, watching me drive away. Their forms were flickering like bad television reception, and their voices carried on the wind. "Come back, David. Come back and bring us our mail. We'll be waiting. We'll always be waiting." I drove straight to the state police barracks and told them everything. They thought I was having a breakdown from exposure and stress, but they agreed to send a trooper out to check the cabin. The trooper found exactly what I'd seen that morning: an abandoned, boarded-up cabin that had been empty for 15 years. No broken window, no sign that anyone had been there recently. But in the snow around the cabin, he found something that made him call for backup. Dozens of sets of footprints that didn't belong to any known shoe or boot. The prints were human-shaped, but too long and too narrow, with what looked like claw marks at the toe. The next morning, I requested an immediate transfer off Route 47. Janet didn't argue. She said I looked like I'd aged 10 years overnight. But when I checked my delivery scanner one last time, I found something that still gives me nightmares. According to the scanner's memory, I'd made 847 deliveries to the Crawford family, not 127 like I'd thought, 847 deliveries over a period of 15 years. Every February 20th since their death, I'd somehow driven out to that cabin and delivered their mail. But I'd only been a mail carrier for 11 years. The Postal Service shut down that section of Route 47 the following week. Officially, it was due to budget cuts and low population density. Unofficially, Janet told me they'd received complaints from other addresses on that route. Families reporting that their mail carrier looked older each time they saw him, and that he'd been asking strange questions about what year it was. I transferred to a nice, safe suburban route in Anchorage. City blocks, numbered addresses, houses that were definitely inhabited by living people. But every February 20th, I wake up to find my mailbag packed with letters addressed to the Crawford family. Letters that weren't there when I went to sleep. And every February 20th, no matter where I am or how far I've moved, my GPS somehow gets me lost. I'll be driving a familiar route when suddenly I'm on a dark, snowy road that looks suspiciously like Forest Service Road 419. I'll see a mailbox in my headlights with the number 1247, and I'll know the Crawford family is inside their cabin, waiting for their mail, waiting for the letter that will save their lives, waiting for a mail carrier who's been dead for longer than he's been alive. I don't deliver mail anymore. I sold my house and moved to Phoenix, where it's too hot for ghosts and too dry for snow. But sometimes, when I'm walking through the desert and the wind picks up, I hear voices calling my name, voices that sound like Tom and Linda Crawford and their 3 children. David, they call, "Where's our mail? Where's our letter? We've been waiting so long." And I know that somewhere in Alaska, there's a route that will never be finished, a family that will never receive their mail, a delivery that will never be completed, because some responsibilities follow you beyond the grave. And some mail carriers never really stop working their route. My name is Carlos Mendez, and I used to drive medical supply trucks across Alaska. Notice I said used to. After what happened on March 15th, 2024, I can't get behind the wheel of any vehicle without my hands shaking. I've been seeing a therapist for 8 months now, but she doesn't believe my story. Nobody does. The official report says I suffered a stress-induced psychotic break and that everything I remember was a hallucination brought on by hypothermia and carbon monoxide poisoning. But I know what I saw. I know what touched me. And I know those things are still out there, watching the roads, waiting for the next driver foolish enough to take the mountain routes alone. I'd been a medical courier for Alaska Emergency Medical Supply for 8 years before that night. Perfect safety record. Never missed a delivery. I started the job after my little sister died waiting for a heart transplant. The organ was delayed by weather, and by the time it arrived, it was too late. I swore I'd never let that happen again. My route covered everything from Anchorage to the research stations above the Arctic Circle. Dangerous work, but honest work. At least, that's what I thought. The thing about driving in Alaska is that you're never really alone. Oh, the roads are empty. Sometimes you won't see another vehicle for 6 hours. But there's always something watching from the tree line. Every driver knows it. You feel eyes on you when you stop for gas in those tiny settlements. You catch movement in your peripheral vision that shouldn't be there. Most of us just ignored it, told ourselves it was wildlife or fatigue. We were wrong to ignore it. The call came in at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday. Janet, my supervisor, sounded stressed. "Carlos, emergency run to Yukon Research Station. They've got people dying up there, some kind of infection outbreak. You're the only driver available, and Highway 3 is closed for construction. You'll have to take the mountain back roads. The mountain roads. 80 miles of narrow, winding pavement through wilderness so remote that if your truck broke down, it might be days before anyone found you. But people were dying, and I had antibiotics that could save them. I loaded up my refrigerated F-450 and headed north into the darkness. The first strange thing happened 40 miles in. My CB radio started picking up voices, deep, guttural sounds that almost sounded like words but weren't quite human. I figured it was some kind of atmospheric interference. Arctic regions can do weird things to radio signals, but the voices seemed to be having conversations, responding to each other with long, warbling calls that made my skin crawl. Then I saw the footprints. Massive tracks in the snow alongside the road, easily 18 inches long with 5 distinct toe marks. The stride length was impossible, over 6 feet between prints. Whatever made them was keeping pace with my truck, walking parallel to the road but staying just outside my headlight range. I tried to convince myself they were moose tracks, but moose don't walk on 2 legs. At mile marker 38, my headlights illuminated something crossing the road ahead. I slammed on the brakes, thinking it was a person, but as I got closer, I realized it was all wrong. 12 feet tall, covered in dark fur, walking upright with a smooth, purposeful gait. When my lights hit it full on, it stopped in the middle of the road and stared directly at me. Its eyes reflected red in my headlights. But the face was the worst part. Almost human, but stretched and distorted, with a mouth full of yellowed teeth and intelligence in those glowing eyes that no animal should possess. It tilted its head to one side, studying my truck with what looked like cruel amusement. I honked my horn. Bad mistake. The sound echoed through the forest, and suddenly the radio voices got louder, more excited. I realized I'd just announced my presence to whatever pack these things hunted in. The creature in the road made a sound, a low, rumbling vocalization that was picked up and repeated by voices in the darkness on both sides of the road. They were communicating about me. The creature stepped aside, but it didn't disappear into the forest. It stood at the edge of my headlights, watching as I slowly drove past. In my rearview mirror, I saw it step back onto the road behind me. They were herding me, guiding me deeper into their territory. That's when my truck started having problems. The engine began making grinding noises, the temperature gauge climbed toward the red, and warning lights started flashing on my dashboard. But the worst part was my GPS. The screen showed my truck moving along the road, but according to the satellite, the road I was driving didn't exist. The map showed nothing but empty forest where I was supposed to be. I pulled over to check the engine, and that's when I heard them moving in the trees. Heavy footsteps, crunching through snow, but from too many directions. I counted at least 6 different sets of sounds, maybe more. They were surrounding me. My cell phone had no signal, which was normal for this area. But when I tried the emergency radio, instead of static, I heard something that made my blood freeze. Children's voices. Young voices crying for help, calling for their parents, begging someone to please come find them. But the voices were coming from different directions in the forest, and some of them sounded like they were speaking words from decades past, using slang and pronunciations I hadn't heard since I was a kid. I realized those things out there were using the voices of people they'd taken, mimicking their last words to lure new victims off the road. My engine died completely. The cargo temperature started rising, 5 degrees Celsius, then 6 degrees Celsius. In an hour, those antibiotics would be worthless. But something told me the people at that research station weren't sick at all. Something told me there was no research station anymore. The forest went completely silent. No wind, no animals, nothing. Then I heard slow, deliberate footsteps approaching from all directions. I looked up and saw them clearly for the first time. 6 massive creatures standing in a circle around my truck, just at the edge of my headlight range. They looked like the thing I'd seen on the road, but worse. Each one was slightly different, as if they'd been changed by whatever they'd consumed. One had human hands grafted onto its massive arms. Another wore tattered remains of a park ranger uniform, stretched impossibly across its huge frame. The largest one had human scalps hanging from its belt, still with hair attached. They started making those vocalizations again, but now I could hear the pattern. They were speaking English, but with voices that weren't their own. Fragments of conversations, pleas for help, final words of people who died alone on these roads. The largest, one approached my truck and placed one massive, partially human hand on my hood. When it looked through my windshield, I saw human intelligence trapped behind those animal eyes. "Please," it said in a woman's voice, perfectly clear, "please help me, my car broke down." Then it smiled with too many teeth, and I realized those weren't just mimicked voices. Those were the actual voices, somehow preserved inside these things, forced to speak their last words over and over for eternity. The creature began examining my cargo through the side window, touching the insulated boxes with deliberate care. It was reading the medical labels, understanding what I was carrying. These things weren't just intelligent, they were learning, adapting, using human knowledge for their own purposes. "Antibiotics?" it said in a different voice. A man's voice this time, clinical and precise. "For the research station. We've been expecting you." That's when I understood. There had been a research station. These things had taken it, consumed everyone there, and were now using their knowledge to lure more victims. The emergency call, the sick people, the urgent delivery, it was all a trap. The largest creature moved to the front of my truck and placed both hands under the bumper. The others positioned themselves along the sides. Working together, they lifted my entire truck off the ground. An 8,000-pound vehicle picked up like it was made of paper. But they weren't helping me. They were taking me. They carried my truck through the forest, along paths that hurt to look at, trails that seemed to twist through dimensions that shouldn't exist. Trees grew at impossible angles, and the sky above showed stars and constellations I'd never seen before. Sometimes I caught glimpses of other vehicles, cars and trucks from different decades, all being carried by more of those creatures toward some central location. We passed a clearing filled with abandoned vehicles, arranged in neat rows like a parking lot. Hundreds of them, some so old they were more rust than metal. Each one had been stripped clean, but not for parts. Personal belongings were scattered everywhere. Wallets, photographs, children's toys, all carefully arranged as if on display. They were collecting us, collecting our voices, our memories, our knowledge, building some kind of archive of human experience, one victim at a time. The creatures carried me for what felt like hours through that twisted landscape until we reached a structure that made my eyes water to look at directly. It was built from vehicles, yes, but also from bones, from metal that seemed to writhe and shift when I wasn't looking directly at it. The architecture followed no human logic. Walls that met at angles that shouldn't be possible. Doorways that opened onto starless voids. They set my truck down in front of this impossible building, and the largest creature approached my window. When it spoke, it used my sister's voice, my dead sister's voice from 20 years ago. "Come inside, Carlos," it said with her inflection, her accent, words she'd never spoken. "We've been waiting for you for such a long time." I don't remember getting out of the truck. I don't remember walking into that building. My next clear memory is waking up strapped to something that wasn't quite a table, surrounded by those creatures and worse things that I still can't fully describe. They were harvesting something from me, not just my voice, but my memories, my experiences, the essence of what made me human. The procedure lasted forever, and no time at all. I felt them pulling thoughts from my head, conversations I'd had, places I'd been, people I'd loved. They were so careful about it, taking only what they needed while keeping me alive and conscious. They wanted me to be aware of what was happening. I saw other people in that place. Some were fresh, still struggling against their restraints. Others had been there longer, their eyes empty, their voices nothing but whispers of their former selves. A few had been there so long they'd started to change, growing fur and fangs and extra limbs, as the creatures rebuilt them into something useful. The worst part was the children. Dozens of them, some still in their car seats, all of them staring at nothing with those empty eyes. The creatures had been taking families off these roads for decades, maybe longer, preserving their voices, their memories, their human essence, for purposes I couldn't understand. I managed to escape only because of a mistake. One of the creatures was using my voice to practice human speech, rehearsing the words for the next trap they'd set. But it made an error. It said something I'd never said, used a phrase that wasn't mine. The inconsistency created some kind of feedback loop in whatever system they were using to extract my memories. In the confusion that followed, I broke free and ran. I have no memory of how I got out of that building or back to my truck. I just remember driving through those twisted forest paths, following road signs that pointed toward destinations that don't exist on any map. The creatures chased me, but something was wrong with them now. They moved erratically, spoke in jumbled fragments of different voices, as if the feedback had damaged their ability to maintain human speech. I drove for hours through landscape that shifted and changed around me, until suddenly I was back on Highway 3, approaching Anchorage in broad daylight. My truck's clock said it was 6:15 a.m., but my phone showed 3 days had passed. The cargo containers were empty. Not just the antibiotics, but the insulated boxes themselves were gone, as if they'd never existed. When I tried to file a report, Janet looked at me like I was insane. According to her records, there had been no emergency call, no delivery to Yukon Research Station. The station itself had been abandoned for over a decade after a workplace accident that killed the entire staff. The antibiotics I'd loaded had never existed in our inventory. The official investigation concluded that I'd suffered a breakdown, driven off-road, and spent 3 days in the wilderness, hallucinating from exposure and carbon monoxide poisoning. They found my truck stuck in a ditch 40 miles north of Anchorage, with damage consistent with rough terrain but no signs of the impossible things I remembered. But I know what happened. I know those things are still out there, still taking people from the roads, still building their collection of human voices and memories. Sometimes, when I'm trying to sleep, I hear my sister's voice calling to me from somewhere far away, begging me to come back and save her. The worst part is the doubt, not about what happened to me. I know that was real. The doubt is about my sister, about whether she really died in that hospital 20 years ago, or whether she was taken on some dark road, and her voice is still trapped somewhere in that impossible building, still calling my name. I don't drive anymore. I can't. Every time I get behind the wheel, I hear those voices on the radio, calling for help that will never come. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if the Carlos writing this story is really me, or just another voice they collected, another memory they're using to lure someone else into the darkness. If you drive the back roads in Alaska, and your radio starts picking up voices that sound like people calling for help, don't stop, don't investigate, don't try to help them. Just drive as fast as you can toward the nearest town and don't look back. Because those aren't people calling for help anymore. They're bait. And once those things have your voice, they'll use it forever. My name is Maria Santos, and I've been driving taxi in Anchorage, Alaska for 16 years. Started when my husband got laid off from the North Slope oil fields in 2009, and what was supposed to be temporary work became my career. I know every back road, every shortcut, every place where cell towers don't reach. I've driven through blizzards that would terrify most people, picked up fares from crack houses at 3 a.m., and dealt with passengers so drunk they couldn't remember their own names. But nothing, and I mean nothing, prepared me for what happened on February 15, 2025. What I'm about to tell you isn't some urban legend or campfire story. It's documented. The Alaska State Troopers have a file on it. The symbols burned into my taxi are still there, and they still radiate cold that makes frost form on warm days. I need to tell someone the whole truth, because more drivers are disappearing, and the official reports aren't telling people what they're really dealing with. I was working for Arctic Express Taxi, pulling the graveyard shift because that's where the money was. Bar runs, airport pickups, emergency calls, desperate people pay cash and don't argue about rates. My 2019 Honda Pilot had 280,000 miles but ran perfect. City regulation required dash cam, GPS tracker, emergency panic button connected to dispatch, and reinforced partition. I also carried a .38 revolver, legal for taxi drivers in Alaska, though I'd never had to use it. February 15th was brutal. Temperature hit -12 with wind gusts, making it feel like -30. Snow had been falling for 18 hours straight. Most drivers called in sick, but I needed the money. My daughter Emma was starting at UAA in fall, and tuition wasn't going to pay itself. Around 11:20 p.m., my radio crackled. Maria, priority pickup at Murphy's Tavern on 5th. Customer requesting long distance, cash payment confirmed. Murphy's was rough, even by Anchorage standards, the kind of place where the bartender kept a shotgun under the register and 3 fights a week was considered slow. But I'd been there dozens of times without trouble. When I pulled up, a man stumbled out through the snow, mid-40s, wearing a Carhartt jacket and sorrel boots, standard Alaska winter gear. His name was Tom Hendricks, I learned later. What caught my attention was how he kept looking over his shoulder, like someone was following him. "I need to get to mile 47 on the Glen Highway," he said, climbing into the back. "Past Eklutna Village. I'll pay $500 cash." That was more than triple normal fare. In 16 years of driving, only 3 things made people pay that kind of money. They were running from the law, running from an abusive spouse, or running from something worse. "That's pretty remote," I said. "Sure, you don't want me to call someone for you?" He pulled out a thick roll of 20s. "I've been trying to get out there for 3 days. Every time I start driving, something follows me. I can't handle it anymore." The money was real. $500 would cover Emma's textbooks for a semester. I took the cash and put the car in drive. For the first 15 miles, everything seemed normal. Tom sat quietly, occasionally checking his phone. The roads were clear thanks to the state plows, and my Honda handled the snow like a champ. Classic rock played softly on the radio. Then, I noticed something in my rearview mirror. 2 red lights, maybe a quarter-mile back, keeping perfect pace with us. At first glance, they looked like headlights. But something felt wrong. They were too low, maybe 3 feet off the ground, and too far apart. When I changed lanes to test them, they changed lanes exactly 2 seconds later. When I sped up to 75, they matched my speed. When I slowed to 60, they slowed too. "You see those lights behind us?" I asked Tom. He turned around and went rigid. "Oh, Jesus, they found me. Again." "What do you mean again?" "Those aren't car lights," he whispered. "I've been seeing them for 4 days. Ever since." He trailed off, but I pressed him. "Ever since what?" "Ever since my hunting partner disappeared." I figured he was drunk or high, but those lights were bothering me. I slowed down to 50, expecting the vehicle to pass. Normal drivers would go around, but the lights slowed down too, maintaining the exact same distance. "This is weird," I muttered. Tom was breathing heavily now. Dave and I were hunting near Talkeetna on Tuesday. We had permits for moose season. Dave was maybe 50 yards ahead when these red lights appeared through the trees. Something grabbed him and lifted him straight up into the air. I heard him screaming, but I couldn't see what was holding him. "Come on," I said. "That's impossible." I reported it to the troopers. They found his rifle and backpack, but no tracks, no blood, no sign of struggle, just his gear sitting in the snow like he'd vanished into thin air. I wanted to dismiss his story, but those lights were starting to unnerve me. I made a sudden right turn onto the old Glen Highway, a move that should have caught any normal tail off guard. But in my mirror, I watched the red lights make the same turn without slowing down. They didn't behave like vehicle headlights at all. "What kind of car can do that?" I asked. "It's not a car," Tom said. We entered a stretch of road that ran through dense forest. I watched in growing alarm as the red lights left the roadway entirely and began weaving between trees, maintaining their distance while moving through terrain where no vehicle could possibly travel. "That's impossible," I said, but I was watching it happen. The lights moved smoothly between tree trunks, over fallen logs, through undergrowth. They weren't affected by the terrain at all. Whatever was producing them could travel through solid forest as easily as open road. My hands started shaking on the steering wheel. "There's a Tesoro station about 8 miles ahead," I said. "We're stopping there." "No," Tom said urgently. "That's where it happened to Dave's truck." We stopped for gas, and the thing drained all the electrical power. Truck wouldn't start. But I was already committed to stopping. When we pulled into the Tesoro, the red lights halted at the forest edge, maybe 70 yards away. Now I could see them clearly. They weren't headlights. They were glowing orbs about the size of basketballs, floating 3 feet off the ground with no visible support. And as I stared at them, I realized they weren't just lights. They were eyes. Massive, glowing red eyes. "Stay in the car," I told Tom, but he was already getting out. We ran into the station together. The clerk behind the counter, a Tlingit kid named Billy Kahat, according to his name tag, immediately hit the door lock. "You led them here," he said, not angry, just resigned. "You know about those things?" I asked. "My grandfather calls them the times Sha Yu Ixwan asterisk, the red-eyed ones," Billy said. "They've been in these mountains for generations, but something changed 6 months ago. They started coming down to the highways, following cars, taking people. Through the window, I could see the red orbs moving closer. As they approached, I began to make out shapes behind the eyes. Tall, impossibly thin figures that seemed to be made of shadow and mist. What do they want?" I whispered. "Witnesses," Billy said. "People who've seen them take others. They collect witnesses to understand how we think, how we react to fear." My cell phone had no signal, which was strange because I'd had full bars 5 minutes earlier. "Phone and radio go dead whenever they show up," Billy explained. "They interfere with electronics somehow." The creatures were close enough now that I could see details. They stood at least 8 feet, tall with elongated limbs and heads that were wrong somehow, too large, too angular. Their bodies were translucent, like smoke given form, but those red eyes were solid and bright, staring at us with obvious intelligence. "There's more of them," Tom said. He was right. Additional pairs of red eyes were emerging from the forest. I counted 12, then 16, then stopped counting. The lead creature began moving toward the building. Instead of walking around to the door, it passed directly through the glass wall like it wasn't there. The temperature dropped 20 degrees instantly, and frost began forming on the windows. "The old mining tunnel," Billy said urgently. "Back exit leads to the tunnel. They can't follow us underground." We ran through the store's back room and out an emergency exit I hadn't noticed. Billy led us about 50 yards to what looked like the entrance to an abandoned mine shaft. My great-grandfather worked this mine in the 1942, Billy explained as we descended into darkness. "The times Sha Yuxuan times never go underground. Something about the earth interferes with them." The tunnel was carved directly into the permafrost, and our breath came out in visible puffs. Billy had a powerful LED flashlight that illuminated rough-hewn walls and ceiling supports. "How deep does this go?" I asked. "About half a mile, connects to 3 other tunnels. We can wait here until dawn." "Dawn?" "They can't maintain form in direct sunlight," Billy said. "Old stories say they come from the spaces between stars, where there's no light." We walked deeper into the tunnel until we reached a wider chamber where miners had probably taken breaks. Billy sat down on an old wooden crate and pulled out a thermos of coffee. "You said this has been happening for 6 months?" I asked. Billy nodded. "Started in September. At first, it was just sightings, people reporting strange lights in the forest. Then drivers started disappearing. Always the same pattern. They pick up a passenger who claims something's following them. Red lights appear, and neither the driver nor passenger is ever seen again." "How many?" Tom asked. "Official count is 7 missing persons. Unofficial count is higher. Some disappearances don't get reported because the people were undocumented or had warrants." "Why didn't anyone warn drivers?" I demanded. "Who would believe it?" Billy said. "The troopers think it's a serial killer using some kind of vehicle modification to create the light effects. They've increased patrols, but the creatures just avoid areas with heavy police presence." We sat in the cold tunnel for what felt like hours. Billy's grandfather had apparently taught him a lot about the creatures, passed down through generations of indigenous knowledge. "The old stories say they're collectors," Billy explained. "They study species by observing how individuals react to fear, to loss, to impossible situations. Earth is like a laboratory to them." "Why now?" I asked. "If they've been here for generations, why are they suddenly taking so many people?" "My grandfather thinks something's changing," Billy said. "Maybe humans are reaching some kind of threshold that makes us interesting to them. Or maybe climate change is affecting their habitat somehow." Around 6:30 a.m., Billy led us back toward the tunnel entrance. Dawn was breaking over the mountains, painting the snow-covered landscape in soft pink and orange light. The creatures were gone. We climbed out of the tunnel and walked back to the gas station. My Honda was covered in strange symbols that looked like they'd been burned into the metal with intense heat. The symbols formed complex geometric patterns across the hood, doors, and roof. "Don't touch them," Billy warned. They'll be cold as liquid nitrogen for weeks. He was right. Even through my winter gloves, the symbols radiated cold that made my fingers ache instantly. When I tried to start the car, nothing happened. The engine was completely dead, as if the battery had been drained. But after sitting in the sunlight for about 20 minutes, it started normally. I drove Tom to his destination, a cabin owned by his brother 47 miles up the highway. We didn't talk much during the drive. Both of us were processing what we'd experienced. When I got back to Anchorage, I went straight to the Alaska State Trooper post on Tudor Road. The detective who took my statement was professional but skeptical. He suggested I might have been suffering from highway hypnosis and sleep deprivation. But 3 days later, Detective Morrison called me back. We found evidence at the Tesoro station that corroborates parts of your story, he said. The security cameras malfunctioned at exactly the time you described, and there are burn marks on the pavement outside the building. We also found similar marks at 6 other locations where people have gone missing. What kind of burns? I asked. Pattern analysis suggests extreme cold rather than heat. Like something supercooled made contact with the asphalt. I quit driving nights after that incident. Arctic Express was understanding. Apparently, I wasn't the first driver to request day shifts only after a strange experience on the highway. The symbols on my Honda never faded. They're still there, 18 months later, and they still radiate cold. I've had 3 different mechanics look at them, and none can explain how the pattern was created or why it maintains a constant temperature of approximately minus 40 degrees. But here's the truly disturbing part. It's not over. Last month, the Anchorage Daily News ran a small article about increasing numbers of missing persons along Alaska's highway system. The official count is now 23 people who have vanished without a trace since September 2024. All were either drivers or passengers in vehicles traveling remote highway sections at night. Billy Kahat has stayed in touch with me. His grandfather says the disappearances follow a pattern from old tribal stories. The Times Shayuxwan Times collect specimens in cycles, gathering information about how a species evolves over time. Tom Hendricks moved to Phoenix immediately after our encounter and hasn't returned to Alaska. He calls me every few months to check if I've had any other sightings. So far, I haven't, but I know they're still out there. 2 weeks ago, another Arctic Express driver named Jake Morrison went missing along with his passenger on the Parks Highway near Denali. They found his taxi the next morning with the engine running, driver's door open, and those same geometric burn patterns covering the vehicle. Jake had been driving nights for 8 years without incident. If you're a driver working Alaska's highways, especially the remote sections, here's what you need to know. If you see red lights following you that don't behave like normal vehicle headlights, don't stop to investigate. Drive directly to the nearest populated area, truck stops, police stations, anywhere with lots of people and bright lights. Don't pull over in remote areas. Don't try to outrun them, and don't assume you're dealing with another human being. If your electronics start malfunctioning simultaneously, radio, cell phone, GPS, engine, you're in immediate danger. Find shelter in a solid building or underground location if possible. And most importantly, if someone tries to hire you for a long-distance trip and claims something has been following them, refuse the fare. I know the money is tempting, especially in this economy, but no amount of cash is worth becoming part of their collection. The creatures are still out there, still taking people, still studying us. The official investigations have gone nowhere because the authorities are looking for human explanations to a non-human problem. I'm telling you this because drivers deserve to know what they're really facing on those dark highways. We're not just dealing with drunk passengers or mechanical problems anymore. We're dealing with something that sees us as specimens to be collected and studied, and every night more red eyes appear in the darkness, looking for their next subjects. My name is Robert Martinez, and I've been driving freight trucks across Alaska's most dangerous routes for 18 years. I started hauling produce runs between Anchorage and Fairbanks when I was 20, broke and desperate for work that paid enough to support my newborn daughter. Over the years, I worked my way up to the heavy equipment contracts, mining machinery, drilling equipment, industrial gear that requires special permits and nerves of steel to transport across Alaska's brutal terrain. I've driven through whiteout blizzards where I couldn't see past my hood ornament, navigated ice roads that crack and shift under the weight of my fully loaded Kenworth T880. I've felt my trailer slide toward 1,000-foot drops on mountain passes, survived equipment failures in 60-below weather that should have killed me. I thought the worst thing Alaska's roads could throw at me was weather or mechanical failure. I was wrong. What happened during a classified government contract last October taught me there are things moving through Alaska's wilderness that make the weather look friendly. Some cargo changes you just by being near it, and some deliveries leave marks on your soul that never heal. The contract came through my dispatcher on a gray Tuesday morning in Anchorage. "Special government run," Janet said, sliding a sealed envelope across her desk. Her usually steady hands were shaking. 3 nights, good money. But Robert. She looked up at me with eyes that had seen too much. "Maybe you should pass on this one." I'd never heard Janet sound scared before. She'd been dispatching freight runs for 25 years, had sent drivers through every kind of hell Alaska could dish out. But something about this contract had rattled her. "What's the cargo?" I asked, tearing open the envelope. "Industrial equipment. Classification restricted." The manifest listed 5 metal containers, each roughly the size of a shipping container but built from some kind of brushed alloy I didn't recognize. Total weight pushed my truck right to the legal limit. The destination was GPS coordinates north of Fairbanks. No town name, no facility address. Just numbers that pointed to empty wilderness on every map I checked. The pickup was at a government warehouse I'd never seen before, despite hauling federal contracts for 8 years. No signs on the building, no company names, just a number painted on a steel gate guarded by contractors with military bearing and eyes that missed nothing. They checked my commercial license, my hazmat certification, my clean driving record, then checked them all again. The containers were already loaded when I backed my trailer to the dock. Each one hummed with a low, constant vibration that I could feel in my bones. The sound reminded me of power lines during an ice storm, but deeper, more organic. Like something alive was breathing inside thick metal walls. "Mr. Martinez." The supervisor was a thin man in an expensive suit who looked like he'd never worked a real job in his life. "Your route and instructions are in this packet. Drive only between sunset and sunrise. Avoid all populated areas. No truck stops, no rest areas, no towns. Fuel only at the locations marked on your map." He handed me an envelope thick with cash. "Do not attempt to inspect or access the cargo containers. Do not discuss this delivery with anyone, including your family. Complete the delivery, obtain the signature, and forget this contract ever existed." The money was 3 times my usual rate for a 3-day haul. Enough to fix my truck's transmission and still have left over for my daughter's college fund. I should have asked why a routine equipment delivery required so much secrecy. Should have wondered what kind of industrial gear needed to travel only at night, but 18 years of barely making ends meet had taught me not to ask too many questions when the money was good. I pulled out of Anchorage just after sunset, my Kenworth's diesel engine rumbling as we headed north on the park's highway. Within minutes, I knew something was wrong with my truck. The steering felt sluggish, like I was pulling a trailer full of concrete instead of machinery. My engine temperature ran hot despite the October cold, and my transmission shifted rough through the gears. 40 miles north of Anchorage, my electronics started acting up. The CB radio filled with static, then picked up transmissions that made my skin crawl. Not normal trucker chatter, but sequences of numbers read in a flat, electronic voice. Mathematical equations or coordinates, repeated over and over in languages I couldn't identify. Some of the voices sounded human, others definitely weren't. My GPS display flickered and jumped, showing my position miles off the highway, then snapping back to the correct location. Sometimes it displayed coordinates that placed me underwater, or underground, or in locations that existed thousands of miles away. The screen would show me driving through the center of mountains, across the bottom of Cook Inlet, or through areas the mapping software couldn't display at all. I assumed the cargo was emitting electromagnetic interference. Government technology often required special shielding, and I'd hauled sensitive military equipment before. But this felt different, stronger. Like the containers weren't just interfering with my electronics, they were rewriting the laws of physics around my truck. The first real sign something was seriously wrong came around midnight. I was climbing a long grade south of Denali when I saw headlights approaching in my mirrors. Another trucker, probably running the same route I usually took. As the truck got closer, the driver started flashing his lights, the universal signal for trouble. I grabbed my CB radio. "Breaker 1 to 9, this is Big Dog northbound on the Parks Highway. You got something for me, driver?" The response came through heavy static. "Jesus Christ, what are you hauling? Get that thing away from me." Before I could respond, the truck swerved into the passing lane and floored it, the driver laying on his horn as he roared past. I caught a glimpse of his face in my side mirror, a middle-aged man with 20 years of road experience, and he looked absolutely terrified. He was staring back at my trailer like he'd seen death itself. I checked my mirrors and nearly drove off the road. My cargo was glowing. Soft blue light pulsed from the containers like a massive heartbeat, growing brighter with each pulse. The light wasn't reflecting off the metal. It was coming from inside, seeping through solid steel like the containers were made of frosted glass. But that wasn't the worst part. Objects in my cab had started floating. My coffee cup hovered 3 inches above its holder, the coffee inside flowing in slow, impossible spirals that defied gravity. My logbook drifted near the ceiling, pages fluttering though there was no wind. Loose change from my cup holder orbited around the CB radio like tiny planets. I pulled over at the next fuel stop, hands shaking so badly I could barely work the air brakes. The moment I stopped moving, the glow faded, and everything in my cab crashed back to normal positions. Coffee splashed across my dashboard, quarters scattered across the floor, and my logbook slammed into the passenger seat. I walked around to inspect my trailer, hoping to find some rational explanation. The containers looked normal in the harsh fluorescent lights of the fuel station. IT, just brushed metal humming quietly in the Alaska night. But the locks had changed. When I'd picked up the cargo, each container had been secured with standard industrial padlocks. Now they were sealed with smooth metal discs that looked like they'd been grown rather than manufactured. No keyholes, no visible mechanisms, just perfect circles of seamless metal that hurt to look at directly. When I reached out to touch one of the new locks, electricity shot up my arm. Not painful exactly, but wrong in every way that mattered. My vision blurred, and for just a moment I could see things that shouldn't exist. Networks of energy flowing through the ground, patterns of light connecting every living thing for miles around, and something vast and alien watching me from a place that existed between the spaces of normal reality. I jerked my hand back, and the vision ended, but the tingling sensation remained. My hair stood on end, and I could taste copper and ozone like the air before a lightning strike. I got back in my cab and kept driving. What choice did I have? I had a contract to complete, money in my account, and a family depending on me. But I noticed other drivers giving my truck an unnaturally wide berth for the rest of the night. Cars would change lanes when they saw my headlights, taking exits to get away from whatever they sensed around my trailer. It was like they could feel the wrongness radiating from my cargo without understanding what it was. The second night was worse, much worse. My truck felt like it was driving through thick liquid instead of air. The steering wheel vibrated constantly in my hands, and the whole cab would tilt and sway like I was climbing steep hills, even on perfectly level highway. My speedometer showed impossible readings, sometimes indicating I was doing 120 miles per hour when I could barely maintain 45. Other times claiming I was stopped dead when the landscape was clearly rushing past my windows. Objects in my sleeper compartment had started floating permanently. My spare jacket hung in midair, sleeves spread like it was being worn by an invisible man. Canned food orbited slowly around the small refrigerator. My thermos leaked coffee upward, the liquid flowing in streams that twisted through the air before disappearing into nothing. The radio chatter got exponentially stranger. Instead of truckers discussing weather and road conditions, I was picking up transmissions that sounded like they were coming from deep space. Star charts read in mechanical voices, coordinates for places that couldn't exist on Earth, and conversations in languages that human vocal cords weren't designed to produce. Sometimes I heard what sounded like the same conversation happening forward and backward simultaneously, or voices speaking in perfect mathematical sequences that made my head ache. But the worst transmissions were the human voices. Truck drivers calling for help on routes that didn't exist, reporting positions that placed them hundreds of miles underground or floating in empty space. One voice I recognized, Tommy Hendricks, a driver who disappeared 3 years ago on a government contract north of Fairbanks. He was calling Mayday coordinates that showed him driving through the Earth's core, his voice growing fainter with each transmission until it faded into static. My GPS had given up any pretense of showing real locations. According to the display, I was driving through alternate dimensions, across the surface of alien worlds, or through the spaces between stars. The coordinates jumped constantly between impossible locations, sometimes showing me thousands of miles beneath the ocean floor, other times placing me in orbit around planets that didn't exist in our solar system. But my body was changing too, and that scared me more than any malfunctioning equipment. I could see electromagnetic fields as ribbons of colored light flowing through the air. Power lines looked like rivers of fire stretching across the landscape. Cell towers pulsed with waves of energy that I could feel as physical pressure against my skin. Electronic devices glowed with different colors depending on their function. Radios burned red, GPS units shone blue, and my truck's computer systems writhed with patterns of green and gold that hurt to look at directly. When I passed other vehicles, I could see the electromagnetic signatures of their occupants, human-shaped outlines of bioelectric activity that let me count passengers without seeing through windows. But some of the outlines weren't quite right, proportions slightly off, too many limbs, or gaps where important organs should be. The worst part was that I was starting to like the changes. The enhanced senses felt like a superpower, like I was evolving beyond normal human limitations. I could perceive layers of reality that other people couldn't see, feel the hidden energy networks that connected all living things. It was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. By the third night, the boundaries between normal reality and whatever dimension my cargo was connected to had almost completely dissolved. My truck existed in multiple places simultaneously. I could see the highway beneath my wheels, but also alien landscapes rushing past in parallel dimensions. Purple skies with 2 moons, endless forests of crystalline trees, cities of impossible architecture floating in seas of liquid starlight. The radio was now picking up transmissions from versions of myself driving the same route in alternate realities. I heard my own voice reporting different cargo loads, different destinations, different outcomes to the same contract. In some realities, I'd already completed the delivery. In others, I'd been driving the same stretch of highway for years, trapped in a temporal loop. In one particularly disturbing transmission, I heard myself screaming coordinates that placed me inside the Earth's molten core, while something that used to be my voice begged for help in a language I didn't recognize. The containers were no longer just glowing, they were singing. Harmonies that resonated in frequencies below human hearing, melodies that seemed to rewrite the fundamental laws of physics with each note. The music was beautiful in a way that made me want to weep, but also alien, enough to make my sanity feel fragile as spun glass. My truck's engine was running on something other than diesel. The fuel gauge hadn't moved in hours, but the engine purred with more power than it had ever produced. When I pressed the accelerator, I could feel the truck drawing energy directly from the electromagnetic fields around us, converting the aurora borealis into horsepower through mechanisms I couldn't begin to understand. Objects in my cab weren't just floating anymore, they were transforming. My spare tire had become a perfect sphere of liquid metal that reflected images of places I'd never seen. My logbook's pages showed entries I hadn't written, describing deliveries to coordinates that existed in other dimensions. Even my own reflection in the mirrors looked wrong. Sometimes showing me at different ages, sometimes displaying versions of myself with eyes that glowed with the same blue light as the cargo containers. The destination turned out to be coordinates that led to apparently empty wilderness, just tundra and scattered trees stretching to the horizon. But as I approached the exact GPS location, the aurora borealis began behaving strangely, forming geometric patterns instead of natural curtains of light. The northern lights spelled out symbols in languages that predated human civilization, then shifted into mathematical equations that hurt my enhanced vision to perceive directly. When I reached the coordinates, the ground didn't just open, reality folded in on itself like origami made of space and time. The landscape peeled back in layers, revealing a facility that existed partially in our dimension and partially in somewhere else entirely. It stretched for miles in directions that violated basic geometry, with architecture that incorporated curves and angles that human minds weren't designed to process. The unloading process was handled by entities that might have been robots, but looked more like mechanical interpretations of deep-sea creatures. They moved with fluid precision, disconnecting my containers with appendages that phased in and out of visible reality. The whole process took exactly 23 minutes, and during that time I could hear the cargo containers singing farewell songs in harmonies that made the aurora dance. I never saw a human being during the entire unloading process. When it was finished, a voice spoke directly into my mind, not through my radio or any external speaker, but resonating inside my skull in frequencies that bypassed my ears entirely. It thanked me for the delivery in a language I somehow understood despite never having heard it before, then transferred my completion signature directly into my truck's computer systems. The ride back to Anchorage was when I realized the changes were permanent and still progressing. I could see electromagnetic fields everywhere, not just from electronic devices, but from every living thing. Trees pulsed with slow, green biorhythms. Animals glowed with the unique signatures of their species. Even insects showed up as tiny sparks of life energy flitting through the darkness. But I could also see the spaces between things, the quantum foam that filled apparent emptiness, the dimensional boundaries where our reality brushed against others, the thin places where things from elsewhere sometimes leaked through. Alaska's wilderness was full of these weak points, spots where the barriers between worlds had worn thin from cosmic erosion or deliberate manipulation. I tried to research the facility when I got home, but found no official records of its existence. The GPS coordinates led to wilderness on every public map I checked, but I discovered references in classified documents that had been leaked online, conspiracy forums where former government employees shared fragments of information about interdimensional research projects. The government was studying technology recovered from crashed objects that weren't built on Earth. They were reverse engineering propulsion systems that operated outside known physics, energy sources that drew power from parallel dimensions, and communication systems that could contact intelligence existing in spaces between normal reality. I wasn't the first truck driver to haul interdimensional cargo. Online forums were full of stories from drivers who'd developed strange abilities after government contracts. Enhanced senses, the ability to perceive multiple dimensions, electromagnetic sensitivity so acute they could hear radio transmissions from satellites that officially didn't exist. Some drivers had disappeared entirely after refusing to take additional classified contracts. Others had been found weeks later, wandering highways that led nowhere, speaking in languages that linguists couldn't identify. I started documenting everything with my enhanced senses. I could photograph electromagnetic fields directly, record radio transmissions from parallel dimensions, and map the locations where reality was thin enough for things to cross over. I reached out to other affected drivers through encrypted channels, and we formed a network sharing information about dangerous cargo and the government programs that used us as unwitting test subjects. That's when the surveillance started. Government vehicles parked outside my house, following me to fuel stops and delivery sites. Agents questioned my neighbors about my activities, my family, my state of mind. They never approached me directly, but the message was clear. They knew where I was at all times, and they could reach my daughter whenever they wanted. The intimidation escalated when I started helping other drivers identify dangerous contracts. My phone lines were tapped, my email monitored, my bank accounts flagged for suspicious activity. Agents visited truck stops where I was known to eat, questioned dispatchers about my route preferences, and made it clear to potential employers that hiring me might result in unwanted federal attention. But they made a crucial mistake. They assumed the changes to my biology were limited to enhanced electromagnetic perception. They didn't realize I could now see their surveillance networks as clearly as I could see power lines. Their radio communications appeared as streams of red light connecting vehicles and personnel. Their electronic surveillance equipment glowed like beacons in my enhanced vision. I could track their movements, anticipate their operations, and avoid their nets with abilities they'd accidentally given me. I've gone underground now, using my modifications to stay ahead of government teams that want to either recruit me for more dangerous deliveries or silence me permanently. I help other drivers identify contracts that involve interdimensional cargo, teaching them to recognize the warning signs that mark deliveries, which will change them in ways they can't undo. We've learned that the government is building a network of facilities across Alaska's wilderness, using them to study and store technology that operates according to physics our science doesn't recognize. They're creating enhanced humans, drivers, pilots, engineers, anyone whose job requires them to transport or interact with interdimensional equipment. We're their test subjects in experiments that push human biology beyond its normal limitations. The worst part is that I'm still changing. My enhanced senses grow stronger every day, allowing me to perceive deeper layers of hidden reality. I can see probability streams flowing from every decision point, watch potential futures branching and merging like rivers of possibility. Sometimes I catch glimpses of the intelligence that built the technology I transported. Vast entities existing in spaces between dimensions, watching our world with interest that feels more like hunger than scientific curiosity. I'm still driving, still hauling legitimate freight across Alaska's brutal highways. But now I can see the hidden networks of energy that flow beneath the surface of normal reality, feel the dimensional boundaries that separate our world from places where different laws of physics apply. It's beautiful and terrifying in ways that language can't capture. If you're ever offered a government freight contract with unusual restrictions, night-only delivery, coordinates instead of addresses, cargo that hums or glows, instructions to avoid populated areas, refuse it. Some deliveries change you in ways that can't be undone, and some cargo connects you to things that exist in the spaces between worlds, entities that take a permanent interest in anyone who's handled their technology. Alaska's highways carry more than just freight and passengers. There are things moving through our world that we're not supposed to see, deliveries happening in the spaces between normal reality, and once you've seen them, once you've been changed by contact with interdimensional technology, there's no going back to the life you had before. The road taught me that reality is far stranger and more dangerous than anyone suspects. And somewhere in Alaska's wilderness, in facilities that exist partially in our dimension and partially in others, the government continues to study technology that could rewrite the fundamental laws of existence. I just hope they know what they're doing. Because the entities that built this technology are still out there, watching and waiting, and every delivery brings them a little closer to our world. My name is Jessica Martinez, and I spent 5 years driving the loneliest roads in Alaska. I started when I was 19, picking up shifts for a small transport company in Anchorage, then moved to rideshare when I turned 21. By the time I was 24, I thought I knew every mile of highway between Anchorage and Fairbanks, every back road through the Matanuska Valley, every shortcut through Eagle River. Alaska's roads will teach you things about isolation you never wanted to learn. In winter, you can drive for hours without seeing another car. Your headlights carve through darkness, so complete it feels solid. The cold seeps through your windows, no matter how high you turn the heat. And sometimes, late at night, when you're alone with nothing but engine noise and static on the radio, you start to understand why so many drivers just disappear up here. I've pulled bodies from overturned cars on black ice. I've given rides to people fleeing domestic violence, drug dealers, and folks who were clearly running from something they couldn't name. I thought the worst things on Alaska's roads were drunk drivers, mechanical failures, and predators of the human variety. I was wrong. What happened 6 months ago changed everything I thought I knew about driving in Alaska. Some roads don't just take you places, they take you to places that shouldn't exist. And some passengers aren't trying to get somewhere, they're trying to get away from something that's been following them through the darkness. It was February 15th, a Saturday night around 11:30 p.m. I was working the Uber night shift, parked outside Chilkoot Charlie's, waiting for ride requests. The temperature had dropped to 18 below, and my 2018 Honda Civic was running constantly just to keep the engine from freezing. I had a thermos of coffee, a phone charger, and about 4 hours left on my shift. My phone buzzed with a pickup request. The passenger name was Marcus R. Pickup. Location outside Humpy's Great Alaskan Ale House on 4th Avenue. Destination: Eagle River, specifically the Meadow Creek Apartments. The fare estimate showed $32 with surge pricing, good money for a single trip. I pulled up outside Humpy's and saw a man in his mid-20s standing under a streetlight. He was tall and skinny, wearing a black Carhartt coat and jeans that looked too thin for the weather. What struck me immediately was how he was standing, constantly turning his head, checking over his shoulder, like he expected something to come out of the shadows. "Jessica?" he asked as he approached my car. "That's me. You're Marcus?" He climbed into the back seat quickly and immediately locked the door. "Yeah. Thanks for picking me up. Eagle River, right? According to the app. Meadow Creek Apartments?" "Yeah, that's right." He was breathing hard, and I could see his hands shaking as he buckled his seatbelt. "How long will it take?" "About 35 minutes. Traffic's light this time of night." As we drove through downtown Anchorage and merged onto the Glen Highway heading north, I kept glancing at Marcus in my rearview mirror. He was pressed against the window, constantly looking back at the road behind us. His breath fogged the glass in rapid puffs. "Everything okay back there?" I asked. "Fine. Just tired." But he wasn't fine. Every time another car's headlights appeared behind us, his whole body tensed. When a semi-truck passed us going the opposite direction, he actually ducked down in the seat. About 10 minutes into the drive, his phone rang. The ringtone was normal, just the default iPhone sound. But when Marcus answered, I heard something that made my skin crawl. A voice was speaking through the phone, but every word was backwards. Not just garbled or distorted, actually reversed, like someone had recorded normal speech and played it in reverse. "Hello?" Marcus said, his voice tight, with fear. The backwards voice spoke for maybe 30 seconds. Even reversed, I could tell it was angry. The tone was aggressive, threatening. Then the line went dead. Marcus stared at his phone screen, his face pale in the green dashboard light. "Wrong number?" I asked. Yeah, probably. But I could see he was lying. The way he was holding the phone, like it might bite him. The way he kept checking the screen every few seconds. 5 minutes later, it rang again. This time, the backwards voice was louder, more urgent. I could hear it clearly through the phone speaker. It sounded like someone speaking English, but played in reverse so fast it was just gibberish. Angry gibberish. Marcus hung up without saying anything. "Marcus, what's going on?" "Nothing, just spam calls." "That wasn't spam. You know whoever's calling." He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the dark forest lining the highway. "It's been happening for 2 weeks. Every night, sometimes during the day." "Have you called the police?" "They said there's nothing they can do unless it's a direct threat. But how can I tell if it's threatening when I can't understand what they're saying?" The phone rang a third time. Marcus let it ring until it went to voicemail. Then it started ringing again immediately. "Answer it," I said. "Put it on speaker." Marcus looked at me like I was crazy. "Why?" "Because I want to hear what they're saying. Maybe I can help figure it out." He answered the call and put it on speaker. The backwards voice filled my car, and this time I listened carefully. There was something familiar about the rhythm, the way the syllables flowed together. It wasn't random noise. It was definitely language, just reversed. When the call ended, I had an idea. "Do you have a voice recording app on your phone?" "Yeah, why?" "Next time they call, record it. Then we can play it backwards and see what they're actually saying." Marcus looked at me like I'd suggested something brilliant and terrifying at the same time. I never thought of that. The phone rang again almost immediately. This time, Marcus recorded the call. The backwards voice spoke for nearly a full minute before hanging up. "Okay," I said, pulling over at a gas station in Eagle River. "Let's see what this is really about." Marcus found an app that could reverse audio files. With shaking fingers, he loaded the recording and hit play. What we heard made us both go cold. The voice, played forward, was crystal clear. "I can see you in the red car with the blonde driver. I know where you're going. I know where you live. Building C, apartment 23, 3rd floor. You left your bedroom window unlocked again, Marcus. I've been inside your apartment. I know what you keep in your nightstand drawer. I know about the letters from your mother. I know about the money you borrowed. You can't hide from me forever." We sat in stunned silence. This wasn't random harassment. Someone was watching Marcus, following him, breaking into his apartment. "We need to call the police right now," I said. "They won't believe me. They already think I'm crazy. They'll believe the recording." But as I reached for my phone to call 911, both our phones started ringing simultaneously. Mine was connected to the car's Bluetooth system, so the backwards voice filled the entire car through the speakers. And this time, the voice was describing my car, my appearance, what I was wearing, where we were parked. Red Honda Civic, license plate, starting with 7G. Blonde driver, about 24, wearing a black North Face jacket. Gas station on the Old Glen Highway. You're both looking at your phones right now. We spun around, looking through all the car windows. The gas station was well lit, but there were plenty of shadows around the building, the dumpster area, the edge of the parking lot where the forest began. There, Marcus whispered, pointing toward the tree line. I followed his gaze and saw a figure standing just inside the forest, barely visible in the darkness. Tall, wearing dark clothing, holding something up to their face. Probably a phone. Drive, Marcus said. Drive now. I put the car in gear and pulled out of the gas station as fast as I safely could. In my rearview mirror, I saw the figure step out of the trees and walk toward a dark pickup truck parked on the side of the road. He's following us, I said. Sure enough, headlights appeared behind us as we got back on the highway. They stayed exactly the same distance back, matching our speed perfectly. Who is this person? I asked. Ex-boyfriend? Someone from work? I don't know. I've never heard that voice before in my life. The phones kept ringing as we drove toward Eagle River. Each call revealed more intimate details about Marcus's life. The caller knew his work schedule, his coffee shop, preferences, the names of his co-workers. He knew Marcus had been looking at nursing school applications. He knew about a fight Marcus had with his roommate 3 days ago. This has been going on for 2 weeks? I asked. Every single day. The calls usually stop when I get home, but tonight, he escalated. He's not just watching anymore. He's making contact. We reached the Meadow Creek apartments, but I didn't turn into the parking lot. The headlights were still behind us, and there was no way I was letting Marcus go into his apartment with a stalker watching. Where are we going? Marcus asked. Police station. This ends tonight. The Anchorage Police Department's Eagle River substation was about 10 minutes away. As we drove, the headlights stayed with us, and both our phones continued ringing. The backwards messages were getting longer, more detailed, more threatening. When we played them in reverse, the content became increasingly disturbing. I have keys to your apartment, Marcus. I copied them last week when you left them on the coffee shop counter. I've been inside 14 times while you were at work. I moved things around just slightly. Your coffee mug, your books, your bathroom towel. Did you notice? I've been sleeping in your bed. I wore your clothes. I ate your food. I know which side of the bed you sleep on. I know you grind your teeth at night. I know you talk in your sleep. You said your mother's name 3 times last Tuesday night. By the time we reached the police station, Marcus was having a panic attack. His breathing was rapid and shallow, and he couldn't stop shaking. Inside the station, we met Detective Sarah Morrison, a woman in her 40s who specialized in stalking cases. She listened to our story and the recordings with growing concern. This is one of the most sophisticated stalking cases I've seen, she said. The backwards speech is a psychological manipulation tactic. It's designed to make you feel like you're going crazy, like maybe you're imagining things. But the level of surveillance described in these calls indicates serious criminal behavior. What do we do? Marcus asked. First, you're not going home tonight. We'll put you in protective custody. Second, we're going to set up surveillance at your apartment and trace these phone calls. Third, we need to get you somewhere safe while we investigate. Detective Morrison arranged for Marcus to stay at a safe house, a small apartment the police department used for witnesses and stalking victims. It was across town from his normal apartment, in a secure building with cameras and controlled access. But the calls didn't stop. Even at the safe house, with a new phone number that only Detective Morrison knew, the backwards calls continued. The stalker somehow had Marcus's new number within hours. And now the content of the calls changed in a way that chilled us all. I know where you are. Now, Marcus. Building 5, Unit 312. 3rd floor, just like your old place. You feel safe because there are cameras, but I've been watching the building for 2 hours. I know which window is yours. I can see you pacing around inside. You're wearing the blue shirt the police gave you. You're drinking coffee from a white mug. You've checked the door locks 4 times in the past hour. The stalker was watching the safe house in real time. Detective Morrison immediately moved Marcus to a second location, a motel room outside Anchorage. She drove him there herself, using an unmarked car and taking a route designed to lose any surveillance. The calls continued. Room 23 at the Mountain View Motel. You arrived 43 minutes ago with the female detective. She's driving a gray Ford Explorer. You ordered pizza 20 minutes ago from Tony's. Large pepperoni. You're watching the news on Channel 7. The volume is too loud. You're trying to drown out the sound of your own thoughts. This was impossible. There was no way someone could have that level of real-time surveillance on multiple locations. Detective Morrison began to suspect they were dealing with more than just a stalker. I've been a cop for 18 years, she told us. I've never seen anything like this. The level of information, the speed of acquisition, the ability to track someone across multiple secure locations. This isn't normal human surveillance. She decided to bring in the FBI. Special Agent David Chen arrived from the Anchorage field office the next morning. He reviewed the case files and listened to all the recordings. His conclusion was even more disturbing than we'd expected. This case has similarities to several unsolved disappearances across Alaska over the past 5 years, he said. Young men, living alone, who reported mysterious stalking behavior in the weeks before they vanished. In each case, family members mentioned backwards phone calls. You think this is a serial killer? I asked. I think this is someone with resources and capabilities beyond what we typically see in stalking cases. The level of surveillance suggests either a highly organized criminal operation or what? Agent Chen hesitated. Or something we don't have a classification for yet. Over the next week, they moved Marcus to 4 different safe locations. The calls continued at each one, always with real-time details that should have been impossible to obtain. The content of the backwards messages began to change again. Instead of just describing Marcus's current activities, they started making predictions. You're going to try to leave Alaska tomorrow, Marcus. You'll pack 1 suitcase and drive to the airport. But there will be an accident on the Glen Highway, black ice near the Kinnick River Bridge. Your car will slide into the concrete barrier at 11:23 a.m. The impact will be fatal. Detective Morrison and Agent Chen decided to test this prediction. They arranged for Marcus to drive to the airport the next day, but with multiple police escorts and road conditions monitored constantly. At exactly 11:20 a.m., a patch of black ice appeared on the Glen Highway near the Kinnick River Bridge. Ice that hadn't been there during the morning road inspection. Marcus's police escort vehicle hit the ice and crashed into the concrete barrier. The officer driving was critically injured. If Marcus had been driving his own car at normal highway speed, he would have died exactly as the backwards voice predicted. That's when I realized we weren't dealing with a stalker at all. We were dealing with something that could see the future. Over the next month, the backwards calls continued, but now they weren't threats, they were warnings. The voice would call and describe future accidents, crimes, or disasters in the Anchorage area. When played in reverse, the messages provided specific details about how to prevent these events. Marcus became obsessed with saving people. He'd decode the messages and then rush around the city trying to prevent disasters. A house fire on Hillside Drive, a robbery at a downtown bank, a car accident at the intersection of Northern Lights and Minnesota. Every prediction came true if we didn't intervene. Every intervention saved lives. But the constant responsibility was destroying Marcus psychologically. He stopped eating regular meals, stopped sleeping more than 2 or 3 hours at a time. He'd get a backwards call at 3 a.m. warning about something happening the next day, and he'd spend all night planning how to prevent it. I tried to help at first. The whole situation was fascinating and terrifying. But after 6 weeks of this, I realized that saving people was killing Marcus. He looked like a skeleton, jumping at every sound, completely unable to live a normal life. The breaking point came when the voice called with a warning about a major earthquake. The backwards message, when reversed, was terrifyingly specific. Magnitude 7.1 earthquake will strike Anchorage on Friday, March 18th, at 3:47 p.m. Epicenter will be 25 miles northeast of downtown. The earthquake will cause catastrophic damage to the Port of Alaska, collapse of the Government Hill overpass, and structural failure of 12 buildings in the downtown core. Estimated casualties, 400 dead, 1,200 injured. That was 5 days away. Marcus went into full crisis mode. He started calling every news station, every emergency management office, every government official he could reach. Most people thought he was crazy, but some listened. He created social media posts, put up flyers around town, even stood on street corners with signs warning about the earthquake. I helped him contact seismologists and earthquake preparedness organizations. We managed to convince several hundred people to take precautions or temporarily leave high-risk buildings. On Friday, March 18th, at exactly 3:47 p.m., a 7.1 magnitude earthquake hit Anchorage. The damage was exactly as predicted: the port, the overpass, the downtown buildings. But because of Marcus's warnings, many people had evacuated or taken shelter. The final death toll was 23 people instead of 400. After that, the local media called us heroes. The Backwards Voice had saved hundreds of lives through our actions. But the calls didn't stop. They became constant. Not just to Marcus, but to me as well. Warnings about everything from house fires to muggings to industrial accidents. We were being given advance knowledge of every tragedy that was going to happen in the Anchorage area. The responsibility was unbearable. I couldn't drive for Uber anymore because I was too terrified that something would happen to my passengers. Marcus couldn't function at all. He was just a shell of a person, running on caffeine and adrenaline, trying to prevent disaster after disaster. We saved lives every day. Car accidents, medical emergencies, violent crimes. We prevented dozens of tragedies because the Backwards Voice gave us the information we needed. But each successful intervention felt like a chain being added to our souls. The final straw came when the voice warned us about a plane crash at Ted Stevens Anchorage International Airport. A commercial flight with 164 passengers was going to crash during takeoff due to engine failure. Marcus called in a bomb threat to delay the flight. While security searched the plane, maintenance discovered a critical engine problem that would have caused exactly the crash the voice had predicted. 164 people lived because of that call. But we were arrested for making a false bomb threat. Even though the engine problem proved we were right, the FBI and local police couldn't explain how we'd known about it in advance. They suspected we were part of some kind of conspiracy or terrorism plot. We spent 2 weeks in jail while they investigated. During that time, the backwards calls continued, but there was no one to act on the warnings. We listened helplessly as the voice described tragedies we couldn't prevent from our jail cells. A warehouse fire that killed 3 workers. A domestic violence incident that ended in murder. A drunk driving accident that killed a family of 4. People died because we weren't free to save them. When they finally released us, the damage was done. The local news had turned against us, painting us as dangerous vigilantes who might be causing the disasters we claimed to prevent. Marcus had a complete nervous breakdown and was hospitalized for psychiatric evaluation. That's when I made the hardest decision of my life. I left Alaska. The moment I crossed the border into Canada, the backwards calls stopped. My phone went silent for the first time in months. I drove all the way to Seattle and started a new life. I got a job as an emergency preparedness consultant, helping businesses and organizations plan for disasters. It was my way of using what I'd learned without the supernatural burden of constant warnings. Marcus stayed in Anchorage. He changed his phone number, moved to a new apartment, and tried to resume normal life. According to Detective Morrison, the calls stopped for him too, but only after he spent 6 months in a psychiatric facility. I still don't understand what was calling us, or why. Agent Chen's final report classified it as an unexplained phenomenon with apparent precognitive elements. Detective Morrison told me she thinks it was some kind of protective entity that's connected to Alaska itself. Something that's been trying to warn people about dangers for generations. The indigenous tribes up there have stories about spirits that speak in riddles, voices that come from the land to warn about disasters. Maybe that's what we encountered. Maybe Alaska itself was trying to protect its people through us. But I know one thing for certain. Some gifts are too heavy to carry. The backwards voice saved hundreds of lives through our actions, but it destroyed us in the process. The knowledge of future tragedies, the responsibility of preventing them, the weight of every life that depended on our ability to decode cryptic warnings, It was more than human minds were meant to handle. I still work in emergency preparedness, but I live a quiet life now. I don't drive for rideshare companies anymore. I never answer unknown phone calls, and if I ever hear that backwards voice again, I'm hanging up and moving to another country. Some roads in Alaska don't just take you places, they take you to knowledge you were never meant to possess. And some passengers aren't looking for a ride to their destination. They're looking for someone to share the unbearable weight of seeing disasters before they happen. Marcus saved hundreds of lives, but the cost was his sanity. I chose to save myself instead of continuing to save others. I still don't know if I made the right choice, but I know I couldn't have carried that weight much longer without losing my mind completely. The backwards voice is still out there, probably calling new people now, giving them the terrible gift of precognitive responsibility. I just pray they're stronger than we were, or smart enough to hang up before it's too late.